Yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm going to slip my name in here on today's.
So sweet Jesus, this meeting is double booked again with the meeting that with another meeting that we all like to love and care about, the AI one.
I'm actually triple booked. Yeah. So I intend to be here. I've already sent the email that I'm here for a little bit, and then I'm going to rush off to the other one. And you know,
I'm in both. We're gonna do this again.
yeah, I already yeah, we do have a doodle poll to fix that other meeting's time. this was not one of the options on the new, but
Hey everyone.
hi there.
Hey, hey.
Hello.
Yeah,
Hey,
I'll dive back into the doc and get some comments in. I think they want to do an about the author section and all that. I'll get in there and put some stuff in.
Awesome, thanks, Jay.
Yeah, I saw the email.
Okay, just while we're waiting to get started here, I'm going to give folks an extra 1 minute to turn up. In the meantime, please do pop into the agenda doc. I will post it in chat here. Add your name to the top. Okay, just before we get started here, or rather, as we get started here, I want to give the opportunity for anyone who's new, anyone who's not been to these meetings before, or not introduced themselves before, to do so. And there's no obligation to do so, but if you want to say hi to the group, just briefly introduce yourself, that would be awesome.
I guess I can go first. So I'm Lori Williams from North Carolina State University, and I will be speaking, so I won't take a lot of time in the introduction time. And I'll be talking in a moment.
So they're requiring everyone to have a LF account. So if you don't have an account, grab one and really take a link. Well, assuming that they drop you an actual link, you're personalizing into the meeting. Try to make that as well.
Sorry, what was that?
Jay, did you intend to be on mute for that?
I'm sorry, guys. Yeah, I put myself on mute. Double timing on these meetings today.
All right, got it, no worries. Anyone else who's new, wants to say hi, introduce themselves to the group? Nope. In that case, we will proceed to our first agenda item today. We have Laurie Williams here to talk to us about some work that she's been doing on proactive secure software supply chain risk management framework. Laurie, take it away.
Right, let me share my screen. I have a few slides. And so, as Isaac said, the proactive software supply chain risk management framework. So I'm at NC State, a professor there, but the work that I'll be talking about has been done on a sabbatical at Synopsys, which is just finishing up. And so, as we all know, with supply chain, there's lots of different help coming from lots of different places, which is good, but it also does leave some confusion. So people wonder, okay, all of that, but what should we do? And so what I did through this academic year was take all of the frameworks and unite them into one framework. So all of the different tasks from all of the different frameworks into one place. And there is a link to that place in the document, in the notes. And so it turned out to be 72 different things from all of the different frameworks. I grouped them, tried to make sense of them into 4 different groups: a governance group, a product group, an environment group, and a deployment group. And under each, there are a number of different practices and then 72 tasks, which is the smallest level.
Do you want questions as we go, Laurie? Or do you want to
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
So going back one slide, where, this in here. So like, what were the criteria for including or not including a framework here? Are these like, how did you decide these are the right 8 ones to incorporate into this framework?
Yeah, that's a good question. And so, I mean, the ones that, so BSIM is a Synopsys framework. So, and they were paying my sabbatical. So that's one. And then, you know, the others were, so like executive order and SSDF gets a lot of attention. So it was really what gets attention. And as, you know, and so in a lot of cases, we all know which ones get attention, but then as I was going through, and as I'll talk about, I've been interviewing people at different companies. And then as there would be more companies talking about a framework, like I'll say the cloud native was one of those that came up because a number of companies were talking about that framework. And then I included it into the framework. And so there could be more frameworks, you know, but these are.
I was going to ask, I mean, do you have somewhere kind of a list of 9 through N which didn't make this cut and maybe would be included in the next one, or what the ones you came across and went, I'm not going to include that, or how did you draw the cut line, I guess?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I could think about which ones, and also suggestions for them as well. I can't think of any off the top of my head. And so the NIST cyber supply chain, that's 800-161. So I can't think of any off the top of my head. I mean, I think these are the, yeah. But I'm open to others that you feel that should be included. Yeah, so anyway, so 4 groups, 15 practices, which are in the blue, which are groupings of specific tasks. And this is a model where I took the software development lifecycle and laid out the practices to where they were on the software development lifecycle in those 4 groups. And so the groups you know, have the different practices under them, and then the colors were who would be the primary person that would likely, you know, be responsible for that. And one of the things, and as you'll see, that all of the different frameworks were really needed to build out the entire life cycle. This is what the practices look.
Just let me interrupt you quickly. We've got Jonathan with his hand up here.
Okay. All right, great. I'll keep an eye on the hands. Jonathan?
Clarification question. Is this the security model focused on from this slide, I'm presuming that it's focused on the business, not on the producer side of the artifacts, or the locations that these artifacts are getting consumed from public open artifact hosts. It's mostly focused on how the organizations consume them. Is that accurate?
Well, it depends, you know, on the perspective. So like, you know, what may be a third-party component to you was developed somewhere. And so it does apply to, you know, things you develop yourself as well, if that makes sense. I mean, so there's a practice about in-house development as well, or a task about in-house development. And then there's also, so internally developed source code is over on the left, third-party components is down on the bottom. So it's trying not to be, you know, trying to be open to the perspective. Does that make sense?
No, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm trying to I guess is the problem, or is the scope of this the consumer who's building an application, or is the scope all the way from the third-party component like, I guess, what is this scoped to, and is this focused on the open source producer, consumer? Yeah, where in that pipeline, or is it all of the above?
I'd say all of the above.
Okay.
Yeah.
But okay, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And this is what the body of most of the framework looks like. So like the pink is the group. So the group is governance. Underneath the group is a practice like perform compliance. And then each of task has a task name, the objective of accomplishing that task, the definition, questions that you would ask to see if you are doing that. And then specifically the mapping between all of the different frameworks, which was the most time-consuming part, was to look at where, you know, the different frameworks that call out for that specific task. Any questions on that? Jonathan, I don't know if your hand's still up or it's re-up.
Nope, still up. I'm switching. Yeah, I'm switching to my laptop from my iPhone. Give me a second.
Okay, all right. Yeah, so this is the body of it. So there's 72 entries like this. And then, you know, why were all of the frameworks unique? Because it is intended to be end-to-end from the management aspects to the deployment aspects. So the top line is how the, you know, my framework came out. And then of the 4 groupings, the governance, a lot of those practices are in the NIST 800-161. And so the way to look at this, I put in red the most influential framework for each one of the groups. And then in the parentheses are specific tasks that were only mentioned in one. In many of the cases, the tasks are mentioned in multiple frameworks. But like under governance, there's 23 in my framework. A lot of them came from NIST 800-161. The product tasks primarily came from SSDF. The cloud native, a lot of the environment came from there, and then deployment came from SSDF, and then some unique ones from different frameworks. So like I did see, as people mentioned the different frameworks, in order to be more comprehensive, really all of the frameworks were needed. Okay. And then this gets into a little bit lower level. So this is at the practice level, like under the governance group, there's 5 different practices, product group, 5 different practices. And it shows the number of tasks contributed by each of the frameworks. And so, you know, you can see under the different tasks where, you know, which ones were the leaders. And I put again in yellow, the same like the leaders, but then the red are unique tasks. So an example of, so component choice, the S2, C2F is, the 4 is in red. It doesn't say that that's 4 unique practices, but it would say that the S2, C2F had at least one practice that no one else had. And that's how you got to be a red. But you know, you can see the contribution of each of these. And one thing, you know, yeah, I'll talk about it at the end, how we can all work together. Any questions about that?
This is super interesting. Oh, I see Arno's got his hand up.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
have
yeah.
a quick question. I mean, first of all, I'm impressed because that's the amount of work this must have required is pretty staggering. So, you know, congrats for putting all that work. But so I'm trying to understand the categories there you have on the left. Did you come up with that list to start with, or these, as you went through all the different frameworks, you know, things came up and you say, oh, I don't have a category for this, so I'll add it there. So like this component choice, as you were reading through S2C2F, you say, oh, they're talking about component choice. I don't have a category for this, so I add it.
Yeah, so I mean, the way I did it was like, you know, I went through and created first a big matrix of all the things. And then afterwards made the groupings. So
I see.
yeah. And so like, for example, you know, the cloud native was one of the last ones I added because people mentioned it, but it turned out to be a really important one, you know, and so the things that came out of that created new practices, new groupings.
Got a question, and sorry if this maybe duplicates what Jonathan asked earlier, but I'm trying to figure out, is the expectation that an organization, this is applied to an organization or to a software project? I'm not sure I understand the scope.
More
That's actually the question, yeah, I was trying to pose. So yeah, thank you for articulating more clearly.
Because like, you know, most of the NIST stuff, like 800-161, assumes there's an organization. For most open source projects, there is no legal organization. So it's often been a challenge. So I'm trying to figure out where the intended application is here.
Yeah, so I mean, I would say a product, and
Product.
but so product in that, just say it's, I know some J is IBM or J is Microsoft. We use Microsoft as an example. Microsoft has lots of products, and each one of them would have a different structure. And you'll see, I've been interviewing companies to find out I mean, the main research objective is to find out how are we doing. That's my research objective. And so as I went through and interviewed companies, then I would interview like a certain product. And there is one open source product that I would like to get involved with to see how does it differ. So it is true that some of the practices might be NA, you know, for some people, and not applicable. But I mean, when I've been doing my interviews, it's been companies who develop products, and all of the practices apply to all of those products. So by companies.
Yeah. I mean, I would be amused to hear things like, you know, please try to do the same for. I think one of my canonical favorites is even.
Yeah. Well, I do have, you know, someone suggested tech talent, and
That's a way larger, and they're focused on supply chains. I would expect them to do better. I'm thinking I do well at that. I'm thinking of relatively small projects which don't have organizational structures, and
right.
you know, is even is one of my favorites because it's a JavaScript package to tell you if a number is even or odd. And okay,
yeah.
the I think it's one line of code. And you know, there's one person. It hasn't been updated in a long time. There is no organization. There's none of these other legal things that people often expect. Oh, and by the way, if it's subverted, a whole lot of important programs get subverted.
Yeah.
So, so I think that's it would be very, very. I worked with best practice. I would recommend trying to find and triangulate many different kinds of projects, to big and small, but make sure you cover the small, because the small ones are far more numerous but challenging.
Yeah, no, good point. Yes. Okay, let's see. The chat is in the same. Okay. All right. So the objective of the framework, and this is again a synopsis sabbatical. So like trying to unite all of the frameworks so that industry can proactively mitigate supply chain risks through guided adoption of tasks. So and what I've been doing is interviewing companies so that to provide a picture of how people are doing, and I'll provide a hypothetical picture in a moment. So to support assessment scoring comparison against peers, standards and guidelines, and I'll show you what I mean. So if people are familiar with, Synopsys has a BSIM, Building Security and Maturity Model, and they've had it for 13 years. And they have like 121 practices, software security practices. And they go into companies and I ask, do you do this, and get some proof? And so then the company comes out of it having a report like this, like say you're the company, you're in blue, and everyone else that's been interviewed is the orange. And so you could take this report that comes out of the interviews to say like, oh, wow, look at that. We're not doing anything related to policy, but the industry is doing pretty well. And you can compare yourself to that. And that's really the purpose of these interviews I'm doing is to give the companies that's been participating this type of a picture. But then Synopsys does publish this BSIM report, which is an industry-wide, which, if then I will publish an industry report without the U on it that can show everyone how are we doing on adopting these practices from these frameworks. So this is the type of spider chart or radar chart for all of the practices, but I also will publish, like just say only the SSDF practices. So how are we doing at the SSDF? How are we doing at S2C2F of the companies that I'm interviewing? Does that make sense? Any questions about that? Okay, so last slide, and this is.
I did have a question, but it was mainly
Okay.
Mainly around you have the 4 areas: governance, product, what was the other one? Other two. The last one was deployment, governance, product,
Environment, yeah.
environment, deployment. Well, and I'm not sure where this will probably go, probably somewhere in the deployment. But one thing I don't see here that you'll only find in maybe a couple of these is end of life. That is, I'm a stickler about that because that does, it's arguable, but I think that should be part of any, what's your end of life plan, your end of life strategy, and then, you know, what's your, how do you manage that so that, applications that have reached end of life that are no longer supported can't be utilized then to create vulnerabilities if they're still being used on legacy and legacy pieces of equipment in the wild. Right.
Right.
These are things I think about, but like I said, only a few talk about that. I don't see that reflected here. It's a composition of all of these other frameworks.
Yeah, no, I mean, and you're exactly right. And I think in that the life cycle part, I think I had end of life on the right, but nothing mapped to it. And so my first pass was to really take all of the frameworks that are out there and map them, because 72 is a lot already. But I think there are things that aren't in those frameworks. And I agree with you that end of life is something that could be added. Something that, you know, we all know and love that is not in there is the use of generative AI. You know, there's nothing about generative AI in any of the frameworks yet. So, you know, I'm at version 0.2, and maybe I should be adding some more practices that don't map to any of the other frameworks, like end of life. So I agree. Okay, so as far as next steps, I mean, I'm finishing up my sabbatical, will publish an industry report of how are we doing for adopting these practices in the different areas. That's pretty near term. I also want to take this framework and develop levels. So, and my levels, my preference is that level 1 says you really, really have to do this. Attackers are using this attack vector, and these are mitigations for the attack vector. So adopt these first, and second and third. So trying to get some of that in there. And then automate the collection of the data if possible. I mean, in the framework, I didn't highlight it so much, but like if you look at the bottom, I do have the OpenSSF scorecard metrics in there. And so trying to show which of the practices are being automatically assessed now and trying to improve that. And then as far as, you know, how I would love your help. First of all, I did these mappings myself. And I know from a scientific standpoint, that's not great. Like having 2 people look at anything is important. Some of the mappings came from different places, like, you know, they mapped between each other. So some of them were not just me, a lot of them were just me. And so, you know, if you really love salsa or something, take a look at the framework and see where I mapped the practices of that framework and give me feedback. I would really love that. And I am still looking for a couple more companies to take part in empirical studies. So, you know, interviewing people within the company to find out if they're adopting the practices or not. So to be part of this industrial study, and then overall provide feedback. And I hope that you find it useful. That's really what it's all about, is trying to bring everything together in order to help everyone. So that's the end of the presentation. It is linked in. Any other questions or feedback? Oh, Matthew? Oh, okay. It's not a hand raise. It's a, I'll receive that.
That was great, Laurie. Thank you. Super useful. And thanks for sharing the slides. For everyone else, the slides are linked in the agenda document. And Laurie, is it, oh, you've got your email address in there. Is it okay if people contact you directly if they're interested?
Absolutely. I would love that. Yeah, I would love that.
Great. I will make a note in the notes of that as well. That folks can reach out to you if they're interested in participating or helping or being part of the study and so on.
Great.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
All right, you're welcome.
Okay, if there are no other questions, we talked a little while ago, I'm trying to figure out how long ago it was, maybe a month or so, about Sterling toolchain. Oh, there we go. It's in the notes for April 12th. And at the time, it was a fairly nebulous concept. I'm not sure that really we had great consensus on what was going on and what was needed. And we suspected that David may be able to come back to us in about a month or so and give us an update. And so, David, this is your chance to do that if you have an update.
Yeah, so I actually put in some notes here to at least try to pre-answer some questions, as it were. So the governing board had this, frankly, the governing board basically said, "Hey, after looking at the various options, we really want to move in this direction of something called a Sterling tool chain." And the question is, what does that mean? And the answer is, well, it's a tool chain that's Sterling somehow. We had a little more than that. That's not entirely fair, but not a lot. It was, I think, about a paragraph. But if I was going to summarize it in one word, I guess I would use the word automation. The notion here is that basically, if we want to see things done at scale, we need to see more automation, so that things don't have to be done by hand every time, and that will increase likelihood of adoption of various ideas. The problem is that's very nebulous, and so I was asked to try to create a very early draft of a concept. And so I started with the mobilization plan and this idea of automation and whatever the governing board had said, and tried to create something that tried to square the circles between those ideas. Unfortunately, during the OpenSSF, not OpenSSF, during the open source summit, I decided to get really sick. That was not my preference. So I have not been able to do anything with this more recently. And I'm not even sure if I really have the pen on this, but basically I made an early draft. I've distributed around primarily to the OpenSSF working group leads, get some initial feedback to have something a little cleaner, and then go back and go further. I think one feedback point, which I'm very sensitive to, and I think is right, is in general, developers will not change the tools that they use. This is not a might not. It is a will not. It does not happen. Okay. In rare cases, they might change, but in general, they will not. So if there's something that says, and change your tool, that's the end of the discussion. So we need to deal with that in a pragmatic way. And I think the way forward here is, for things that need to be developed and extended, yes, sure, develop new tools, but make sure we can find ways to use them as plugins, integrative mechanisms, so that people don't just have to replace all their tools. Now, exactly what it's supposed to do and so on, we're frankly still working on that. But basically trying to make it easy to create a new project if that's not already there, and then various things to deal with some common issues to counter attacks, anywhere from improving the likelihood that it's not going to have vulnerabilities in the first place, hardening up the build, and so on, getting SBOMs and so on. So it's not as mature as I was hoping, but we're working on it. So that's
super helpful background. And just a pointer to everyone, these notes are in the agenda doc, and there's a link to the Sterling toolchain definition. One of the things, David, one of the questions that I had that wasn't super clear from the doc is what are we contemplating building new things here with code, or are we talking about building a reference architecture, or are we talking about building reference architecture and persuading other people to build code? Like, to what extent is OpenSSF as an entity intending to actuate this plan?
okay. I suspect you'll get some differences. Okay.
Aha, got it. Okay.
Okay, because I mean, if you, but I think the quick answer is build code, write code.
Got
Okay,
it.
not just an architecture. Now, I do think that figuring out an architecture is a necessary part of that, but basically, the governing board, basically, where this came from was we actually had somebody interview each of the governing board members. Hey, what do you want to do? What do you want to see? And they ended up with, oh, I guess it's 3 paragraphs. Ooh, it's not just one, but each of those paragraphs is pretty short. So, but I'll point out in particular the middle paragraph. We will build an autonomous tool chain. Okay, so not just an architecture, but actual code. Because in the end, nobody cares about architectures. Really, architectures are useless unless they are implemented somehow with code, with hardware, with people. But if they don't turn into something that you use, then it's just another document we can ignore. Now, that doesn't mean that documents are useless, because it's hard to write code if you don't know what it's supposed to do. So, so I don't think those two ideas are in conflict, but I think the goal is to eventually have code. Now, we don't have to necessarily write it all. In fact, I think the goal would be to, as much as possible, not write it, but use what's there, and much more focus on integrating piece parts.
And so one way of reading that, because I think Krob had a similar comment in your document, like we will build an autonomous toolchain. One could squint and read that as we will assemble an anonymous toolchain, which could be that we take parts off the shelf and put this thing together in a way that we think is represents best practice, but it's not necessarily that we're building all the components in the toolchain.
Oh, right. No, absolutely not. I think it would be crazy to re-implement things from scratch when there are perfectly good components out there. I mean, I'm not sure there is an open source way, but if there is, I would say reuse where practical is definitely part of that.
Got it.
Yeah, so yeah, absolutely. Reuse what's there, and unless there's some problem. But I think the perception is that right now people have to assemble their own car. Here's I dumped a large number of parts on your lawn. There's a lot of duplications. Figure out how to assemble the car. And I think the goal here is you push the button and here's your car.
Got it.
So now that car may be, I saw the parts that you're already using, and here's the, you already have a scooter, all you need is a motor here or whatever. I think my analogy is breaking down, but but the notion here is, why don't we think we want to build, but I think there's an expectation that there will be some things we build, even if it's simply small amounts of glue code.
Yeah, I got you. That makes sense. And then the other question I had here is just kind of relationship or adjacency with Fresca. Like, is Fresca a part of this? How should people think about Fresca as, again, at a squint, looks kind of similar?
I've actually talked with the Fresca people a little bit. Okay, I'm going to say some things, and I don't mean them to be negative. Okay, I truly don't. I'm not sure. Okay. Fresca has a lot of interesting capabilities, but as I mentioned earlier, developers in general will not say, oh, look at this cool thing, I'll replace all the tools. And I think this is the challenge that Fresca is facing. Fresca is assuming that you are cloud native and you're willing to just throw away what you do and use their suite instead.
Got it.
They have gotten very little pickup. And it's not because people look at Fresca and say, oh, what a terrible idea, you people are stupid. That's not what anyone is saying. It's but I'm not cloud native, or, but I already have a tool suite. And so I think they are victims of the problem I just mentioned earlier. In general, developers won't, after investing years of effort and understanding the tools that they use, they're generally not just going to pick up and swap. I don't think that's a killer, by the way, for the Sterling toolchain concept, because I think the goal is automation. So, as I said, to oversimplify to one word. but we need to find a way to help people get from where they are to where we think they want to be. Or no?
Yeah, so first on Fresca, I agree with you, and I think they would agree as well. And I heard Mike Lieberman was one of the leaders of the Fresca project. Actually, he said the other day that they are thinking of trying to extract the build part of Fresca so that that could be reused alone and integrated to an existing pipeline, as opposed to just do what you're saying, like, throw away your pipeline, use this one instead, which indeed doesn't fly very well. The other part is, I mean, Fresca cannot be anyway the whole solution, right? Because the tool chain we're talking about encompasses a lot more than what Fresca even tries to do.
Yeah.
So, I mean, things like, scanning, things that are talked about in the Sterling toolchain document for now is not even in scope for Fresca. And by the way, one more point on the Fresca thing is, I've heard people say they use it as a reference when they are trying to implement Salsa and trying to figure out, okay, what does it mean? How do I do this? They look at what Fresca does as an example to follow, but indeed
Got
they
it.
don't.
Right.
So might think of Fresca as kind of when Microsoft fleshes out fairly complete samples like Contoso or Northwind, or I'm sure Jay can give me what the latest are, but these are kind of almost fully implemented examples, but the intent is they're educational in nature. It's not that you're expected to take this thing and deploy it. It's more like this helps you understand how to put things together.
Right.
Got it. That's super helpful. That makes a lot of sense to me. So in terms of next steps for Sterling Toolchain, David, is the document you linked to, is it a process of kind of refining, incorporating comments, kind of whittling that down until it's smooth and shiny, and then once we got agreement on this concept, we go, okay, now let's make it happen?
Short answer, yes. Okay. I mean, to be honest, I think it's been the phrase, if you think you have a problem of, hey, what does Sterling Toolchain mean? Imagine the people who are trying to figure out how to implement it. So as I said, I think there's general agreement that the automation, but that's actually been the challenge, is to try to go from highly abstract couple words ideas into, okay, now what?
But so the TAC actually is looking into it now, right? I mean, it's one of the
Right.
one of the work item that the new TAC has decided to try to tackle. And the way I see it is the governing board basically, had this bright idea and just threw it out and say, hey, TAC, you go figure out what that means and make it happen. And so the TAC is trying to, say, okay, what does it mean? Better frame what that might actually mean, but the TAC is not going to do that work either, right? So I think once we have a better definition of what the Sterling toolchain is, the TAC will then figure out, okay, who's going to do it, and there may be, maybe a new project within the OpenSSF that gets started to look into this and actually do the implementation. And there may be multiple ones, because one of the challenges is, having a generic tool chain is not going to work across all the different ecosystems you have. If you're dealing with PyPy or Maven or NPM, they're all going to require specific tools that don't necessarily, work on a generic level. You might define at the generic level some architecture that, is applicable across the different framework, the different ecosystems, the kind of features you want to have, what functionality should be, implemented by the tool chain. When it comes to the actual implementation, I suspect we may have variations there. So there may be different projects for all I know, one that focuses on a particular ecosystem and another to another ecosystem and so on. But this is yet to be defined. I mean, I'm just sharing my thought on it.
Any other thoughts from the group before we move on from this topic? I will take that as a no.
All right.
All good.
I need to run to another meeting that I'm also supposed to be in. I'm triple booked. So.
All right. Thanks,
Okay.
David. It's good to
All
see
right.
you.
Thanks. Bye. I may come back if I can.